The massive Imperial flagship, Star Sovereign, hung in space like a gleaming knife, its golden hull reflecting the light of distant stars. Admiral Drake of the Imperial Galactic Fleet stood on his command bridge, his 4 arms crossed behind his back as he watched the primitive human vessels approach. His species had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, and these newcomers would learn their place like all others before them. Amusing, Drake muttered, his scaled skin shifting colors from royal purple to deep blue. They dare to approach us with such outdated technology. His crew of various alien species worked silently at their stations, all expecting an easy victory. The human ships looked almost comical compared to the Imperial vessels. While the Imperial ships were sleek golden arrows stretching for miles, the human vessels were bulky, utilitarian, and painted in simple gray. They had none of the elegant curves or advanced energy shields that marked civilized space travel. Open communications, Drake commanded. Let us educate these primitives on proper protocol when meeting their new rulers. The communications officer, a tentacled being named Glix, activated the channel. Channel open, Admiral. Drake's voice boomed across space. Attention human vessels. This is Admiral Drake of the Imperial Galactic Fleet. You have entered Imperial space without proper authorization. Submit to boarding and inspection immediately, or face destruction. You have 5 minutes to comply. The response came quickly, but not in the form Drake expected. Laughter. Human laughter echoed through the bridge, causing several crew members to shift uncomfortably. This is Captain Tom Rogers of the Earth Defense Force, a casual voice replied. Sorry about the laugh, Admiral, but we couldn't help ourselves. You might want to take a closer look at our primitive ships before making threats. Drake's skin rippled with irritation. Insolent creatures. Scan their vessels. Show these humans the consequences of disrespect. The sensor officer, a crystalline being called Clear, began the scan. Suddenly, their crystalline structure flickered with alarm. Admiral, these readings, they can't be correct. Explain, Drake demanded. Sir, their hull, it's made of materials we can't identify. And there's energy readings that don't match any known technology in our database. They're using principles of physics we don't even understand. Drake's skin shifted to a pale yellow of concern. Impossible. We are the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. These are primitive beings who barely left their solar system a century ago. Actually, Captain Rogers' voice came through again, still sounding amused, we've been watching your empire for quite a while. You see, humans have a different approach to technology. While you focused on making things pretty and following the same old principles for millennia, we kept experimenting, innovating, and thinking outside the box. The sensor officer's voice trembled. Admiral, I'm detecting what appears to be artificial gravity manipulation on a quantum scale. Their ships aren't using conventional propulsion at all. They're surfing gravitational waves. Drake's skin turned ash gray. Impossible. The Empire's greatest scientists proved that was theoretical at best. Oh, that's just the beginning, Rogers said cheerfully. You might want to look up human history, Admiral. We have this funny habit of doing impossible things. Did you know we went from our first powered flight to landing on our moon in just 66 years? While your empire was perfecting the same technology for 10,000 years, we were breaking rules you didn't even know could be broken. More human ships began appearing from what seemed like nowhere. The sensor officer was nearly vibrating with panic. Admiral, they're using some form of space-time manipulation we've never seen before. Our sensors can't even process how they're doing it. Drake watched in growing horror as human vessels of various sizes emerged from what his instruments insisted was empty space. Their primitive design masked technology so advanced it might as well have been magic to the Empire's finest minds. Here's what's going to happen, Rogers continued, his voice still carrying that infuriating hint of amusement. We're going to sit down and have a nice chat about updating your empire's understanding of physics, technology, and diplomacy. Because threatening to destroy ships you don't understand? That's not just bad manners, it's really, really poor strategy. The bridge fell silent as Drake realized the universe he thought he understood had just turned upside down. The humans hadn't come to submit to the Empire's rule. They had come to show the Empire just how much it had to learn. Oh, and Admiral? Rogers added. That 5-minute deadline you gave us? It expired 2 minutes ago. Just thought you'd like to know we're still here, laughing. Drake's skin shifted through a rainbow of colors before settling on the white of surrender. In just one encounter, humanity had shattered 10,000 years of imperial certainty. And they had done it not with weapons or threats, but with innovation, ingenuity, and laughter. The Empire's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating human technology, it was assuming that looking advanced meant being advanced. As Drake prepared to open diplomatic channels properly this time, he couldn't help but wonder what other impossible things these humans had achieved while the Empire had been admiring its own reflection in its golden ships. 3 days after the initial encounter, Admiral Drake found himself in a situation he never imagined possible, sitting in a conference room aboard the human vessel, Prometheus, watching his entire understanding of the universe crumble with each passing minute. Captain Rogers stood at the front of the room, casually pointing to a holographic display that put the Empire's best technology to shame. The display showed complex mathematical equations that made Drake's head spin, while human engineers explained concepts that seemed to violate everything the Empire held as fundamental truth. You see, a human engineer named Mike explained, pointing to a diagram, your ships are like perfect arrows flying through space. Very efficient, very beautiful. But ours? Ours are like surfers riding waves. We don't fight against space-time, we dance with it. Drake watched as his own scientific advisors scribbled notes frantically. But the golden scrolls of imperial science clearly state that such manipulation of space-time requires energy levels beyond what any civilization could achieve, he protested. The humans exchanged those knowing looks that Drake was beginning to dread. An older human scientist named Bill stepped forward, his gray hair and casual clothes a sharp contrast to the ornate uniforms of the imperial scientists. Tell me, Admiral, Bill said, pulling out what looked like a simple metal cube, what do your scrolls say about this? He placed the cube on the table, and suddenly gravity in the room reversed. Drake and his advisors found themselves standing on the ceiling, while the humans remained firmly planted on the floor, grinning. Impossible, squeaked one of Drake's scientists, his scales turning a pale green of distress. That's becoming a pretty common word around here, Captain Rogers chuckled, watching as Bill normalized gravity again. You know what's funny? That device was built by high school students during our annual science fair last year. Won 3rd place, if I remember correctly. Drake's third heart nearly stopped. School children, he whispered. Oh yes, Rogers continued. The first-place winner actually created a small pocket universe in a jar. Very impressive, but the judges felt it wasn't practical enough for everyday use. The second place went to a girl who developed a way to turn homework into renewable energy. Now that's been revolutionary for our education system. The imperial delegation sat in stunned silence. Their civilization had spent millennia perfecting what they believed to be the peak of technological achievement, only to discover they had been running in place while humans sprinted past them in directions they never thought possible. But how? Drake finally managed to ask. How did you advance so quickly? A young human engineer named Jack spoke up. We failed. A lot. We failed more times than your empire has existed. But each failure taught us something new. While you were perfecting what you knew, we were breaking everything we thought we knew and putting it back together in new ways. To demonstrate, Jack pulled out what looked like a child's toy, a simple rubber ball. Watch this, he said, bouncing it on the table. Each bounce created a small window into different parts of the universe. Another runner-up from the science fair. The kids love using these to study astronomy. Drake watched as galaxies, nebulae, and distant worlds flickered past with each bounce. His finest ships couldn't achieve this level of observation, and humans gave it to their children as toys. The thing about humans, Captain Rogers said, leaning back in his chair, is that we never learned we couldn't do something. When someone says, impossible, we hear, challenge accepted. When your scientists wrote laws of physics, our scientists asked, why and what if? A hologram appeared showing Earth's history. Drake watched in fascination as humans progressed from simple wheel-based vehicles to space travel in what seemed like the blink of an eye in cosmic terms. Look here, Rogers pointed. This was us figuring out powered flight. And here, just a few decades later, we were walking on our moon. While your empire was writing poetry about the impossibility of manipulating quantum states, our researchers were already quantum tunneling to work to avoid morning traffic. Drake's skin shifted through various colors as he processed this information. The Empire, we have been blind, he admitted. We saw your ships and assumed primitive technology because they didn't match our aesthetic of advancement. That's the thing about real progress, Bill said kindly. It doesn't always look pretty. Sometimes the most advanced technology looks like a bunch of duct tape and hope held together by math that reads like a coffee-stained notebook. As if to prove his point, a junior human engineer walked in, carrying what looked like a lunchbox with wires sticking out of it. Hey, Captain, she said excitedly, we just figured out how to fold space using this old microwave and some paper clips. Want to see? Drake watched in a mixture of horror and amazement as the humans casually demonstrated yet another, impossible, feat using what appeared to be junk. His empire had spent thousands of years building beautiful ships that followed every rule, while humans had spent their time breaking rules they didn't even bother to write down. So, Captain Rogers said, clapping his hands together, shall we discuss that trade agreement? We're particularly interested in exchanging some of our primitive technology for access to your empire's vast cultural database. Our historians are fascinated by your 10,000 years of recorded history. Drake looked around the room, at his humbled scientists, at the casual displays of technological wonders, at the humans who treated the impossible as an everyday occurrence. He realized that this meeting wasn't just about technology, it was about two fundamentally different approaches to existence. The Empire had sought perfection, humanity had sought possibility. Yes, Drake said finally, his skin settling into a humble shade of blue. I believe the Empire has much to learn from Earth's perspective on progress. Excellent. Rogers beamed. And don't worry too much about the whole threatening to destroy us thing earlier. We've all made that mistake at least once. Now, who's hungry? Our chef just figured out how to make ice cream that lets you taste colors. It's literally impossible, but don't tell him that, he doesn't believe in impossible. News traveled fast across the Empire, even faster once humans shared their primitive communication technology that somehow managed to ignore the speed of light entirely. Within a week, Emperor Maximus himself announced his intention to visit the human delegation. This caused unprecedented panic among Imperial protocol officers, who had spent centuries perfecting the art of Imperial appearances. The Emperor's personal vessel, Eternal Glory, was the size of a small moon and had taken 300 years to construct. It was considered the pinnacle of Imperial engineering, its every surface covered in rare metals and precious gems. As it approached the meeting point, however, something unexpected happened, it got stuck in traffic. What do you mean, traffic? Emperor Maximus demanded, his ceremonial robes shimmering with rage. We are in space. There is no such thing as space traffic. The navigation officer, trembling, pointed to the screens showing hundreds of small human vessels zipping about in what appeared to be organized chaos. They've established something called commuter lanes, Your Majesty. Apparently, many humans now live on various planets and moons but still commute to Earth for work. They commute between planets? The Emperor watched in disbelief as a human vessel the size of a small bus casually folded space around itself, disappeared, and reappeared several light-years away. How do they afford the energy costs? They don't have any, Your Majesty, Admiral Drake explained, having been summoned to guide the Emperor through this bizarre situation. They've developed something they call zero-point energy extraction. According to their engineers, they get it from recycling their morning coffee cups. The Emperor sat heavily on his trillion-credit throne. Coffee cups? Yes, Your Majesty. Apparently, the residual coffee rings contain trace particles that, when properly processed, can tap into vacuum energy. They discovered it by accident when a scientist spilled coffee on their quantum mechanics homework. Before the Emperor could process this information, a cheerful voice came over the comm system. Good morning, Imperial Vessel. This is Terry from Earth Traffic Control. Please proceed to Parking Lot C. We've reserved a spot for you next to the Jupiter High School Senior Field Trip vessels. Please be careful not to ding any of the students' ships. Last week someone scratched a freshman's science project, and the resulting temporal distortion turned Thursday into Tuesday. The Emperor watched as his grand vessel was directed by a human traffic controller who sounded like he was managing a shopping center parking lot. The eternal glory, pride of the Empire, eventually found itself parked between what appeared to be a converted school bus that could travel between dimensions and a student-made ship that looked like it was held together with rubber bands and optimism. When the Emperor finally boarded the human diplomatic vessel, he was met not with the expected grandiose ceremony, but with a casual welcome party. Captain Rogers stood there in what humans called a Hawaiian shirt, holding a beverage container labeled "World's Okayest Captain." Welcome to the Prometheus, Your Majesty. Rogers grinned. Sorry about the parking situation. Ever since we figured out how to make space travel cost about the same as a bus ticket, things have gotten a bit crowded up here. Would you like some coffee? I promise it won't be used for energy production until you're done with it. The Emperor, trained from birth in the art of maintaining imperial dignity, found himself completely at a loss. Yes, coffee would be acceptable. He paused, watching a group of human children run past, playing with what appeared to be miniature black holes as if they were marbles. Are those children playing with singularities? Oh yeah, the quantum marble craze, Rogers nodded. It's this year's hot toy. Kids love them because they never lose any marbles, they just have to check parallel universes to find where they rolled off to. Though we did have to ban them in schools after some kids started using them to store their homework in alternate dimensions. As they walked through the ship, the Emperor noticed something odd. Your vessel, it appears larger on the inside than the outside. Oh, that, Rogers waved casually. Yeah, we solved the whole space limitation issue by just adding more space. Turns out space is pretty flexible if you ask it nicely. The interior decorators love it, infinite room to work with, though it can be a pain finding your keys when they fall into a pocket dimension. They entered what appeared to be a simple conference room, though the Emperor couldn't help but notice that the coffee machine in the corner occasionally produced cups of coffee that hadn't been ordered yet, and then retroactively created the order for them. Now, Rogers said, sitting down at the table, I believe you wanted to discuss the possibility of technological exchange? Fair warning, our tech support can be a bit confusing. Last week, someone called with a problem, and the solution involved teaching quantum physics to a cat. The cat now has a PhD and is leading our research into string theory. The Emperor, who had spent millennia believing his civilization was the peak of achievement, found himself wondering if perhaps the universe had a sense of humor after all. Here were humans, treating cosmic forces like convenient tools and solving physics problems that had stumped imperial scientists for generations, all while acting like it was no more remarkable than fixing a leaky faucet. I must ask, the Emperor finally said, how did your species advance so quickly? How did you achieve all this in such a short time? Rogers thought for a moment, sipping his coffee that might or might not have been ordered yet. Well, Your Majesty, I think it's because we never got around to deciding what was impossible. We were too busy trying things that shouldn't work to notice they weren't supposed to work. It's amazing what you can achieve and you don't know you can't achieve it. Just then, a human scientist burst into the room, excitement clear on her face. Captain! We've done it! We finally figured out how to download a pizza. The Emperor watched in stunned silence as the scientist proceeded to demonstrate a device that could transform digital data into hot, fresh pizza. But that violates at least 7 fundamental laws of physics, he protested. Oh, those laws? Rogers grinned. We had a committee review them last Tuesday. Turns out they were more like guidelines anyway. Would you like a slice? It's downloaded fresh from Naples. As the emperor of the most powerful civilization in known space sat there, eating downloaded pizza with humans who treated impossible things as minor inconveniences to be overcome before lunch, he realized something profound. Perhaps it was time for the Empire to stop writing rules about what couldn't be done, and start asking, what if? 1 month into the Human Imperial Exchange Program, the Imperial Central Academy was in complete chaos. The problem wasn't that the human teachers were bad at their jobs, quite the opposite. The problem was that they were too good at making the impossible seem reasonable. Professor Jim Brown, a retired high school science teacher from Earth, stood in front of a class of the Empire's most elite scientists, drawing on a simple whiteboard with markers. The room was dead silent except for the occasional sound of an Imperial scientist's brain short-circuiting. So, you see, Jim said, casually erasing an equation that violated 3,000 years of Imperial physics, if you want to achieve faster-than-light travel, you don't actually need to go faster than light. You just need to convince space that you're already where you want to be, and then let reality catch up with your paperwork. An Imperial scientist raised a trembling hand. But how do you convince space of anything? Space is not sentient. Jim smiled the patient smile of someone who had taught teenagers about quantum mechanics. Well, that's where you're wrong. Space is quite reasonable if you know how to talk to it. Watch this. He pulled out what looked like a simple pencil and drew a circle in the air. The circle became a portal through which they could see the cafeteria on the other side of the campus. Lunch anyone? Jim asked, stepping through the portal. Today's special is meatloaf, though I should warn you, the cook has been experimenting with quantum cuisine. The food might exist in multiple states until you observe it. Meanwhile, in another part of the academy, human engineer Bob Wilson was teaching a class on human engineering principles. He had just finished explaining how humans had solved their energy crisis by accidentally discovering that cats purring on quantum keyboards could generate infinite energy. The hardest part, Bob explained, pointing to a diagram of a cat sleeping on what looked like a computer keyboard, was convincing the cats to show up for regular work shifts. We eventually had to classify napping as a critical engineering function. An Imperial engineering student raised their hand. But sir, how did you discover this? Oh, that was a complete accident, Bob chuckled. Someone's cat walked across their quantum computer keyboard while they were working on a physics simulation. Instead of crashing the program, it solved all the equations and left a note saying meow. Took us a while to realize the cat had inadvertently discovered a new fundamental force of the universe. We call it the feline constant. In the Academy's technology department, human IT specialist Mary Cooper was trying to explain the concept of turning it off and on again to increasingly distressed Imperial tech experts. You see, Mary said, rebooting a quantum mainframe by unplugging it and counting to 10, sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Yes, your quantum uncertainty processors are very impressive, but have you tried hitting them with a rubber mallet while saying, "Work, you stupid thing"? To everyone's surprise, this actually fixed several long-standing issues in the Imperial computing network. The Imperial tech priests were torn between horror at the blasphemy and amazement at the results. Back in the administrative office, Principal Drake, formerly Admiral Drake, who had requested a transfer to education after deciding that understanding humans was more important than commanding ships, was dealing with an unusual parent-teacher conference. A human family had enrolled their teenager in the Academy's science program, and their science project was causing some concern. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Drake said carefully, while we appreciate young Billy's enthusiasm, we're a bit concerned about his science project. He appears to have created a small universe in his locker. Oh, that old thing? Mrs. Thompson waved dismissively. That was just his practice project. He's planning something much bigger for the science fair. He wants to create a theoretical framework for why math works. You know how kids are with their ambitious projects. Drake's scales shifted to a pale yellow of concern. A theoretical framework for why math works. But that's impossible? Mr. Thompson finished with a knowing smile. You might want to avoid using that word around Billy. Last time someone told him something was impossible, he proved P equals NP during recess just to be contrary. In the Academy's cafeteria, human and Imperial students were mingling, sharing ideas and snacks. A group of human exchange students had introduced their Imperial classmates to the concept of food fights, but had to stop when someone accidentally created a localized time paradox with a thrown sandwich. Sorry about that, one human student said, helping to clean up the mess that existed in 3 different temporal states simultaneously. Mom always said my sandwich-making skills were time-warping, but I didn't think she meant it literally. The Imperial students were beginning to adapt to the human way of thinking, though it was causing some interesting side effects. The Academy's suggestion box was overflowing with ideas that would have been considered heretical just months ago. What if we tried making spaceships that don't look pretty? Can we test if the laws of physics are just really strong suggestions? Has anyone tried asking the universe nicely to change its constants? Could we optimize our quantum computers by adding more cats? Principal Drake reviewed these suggestions with a mixture of pride and trepidation. The Empire was changing, one impossible idea at a time. The humans hadn't just brought new technology, they had brought a new way of thinking, a new way of approaching problems, and most importantly, a new way of ignoring the word impossible. As he watched a group of students testing whether they could make a perpetual motion machine powered by bureaucratic paperwork, surprisingly, it was working. Drake realized that the Empire's greatest strength had become its greatest weakness. They had become so focused on perfecting what they knew that they had forgotten to question why they knew it. The humans, with their casual disregard for established limitations, their endless curiosity, and their habit of achieving the impossible through methods that seemed to border on the absurd, were teaching the Empire a valuable lesson. Sometimes the best way to advance isn't to build on what you know, but to question why you think you know it in the first place. 6 months after the first contact between humans and the Empire, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one, not even the humans, could have predicted. The Imperial Central Council was holding its first ever casual Friday, and Emperor Maximus had traded his ceremonial robes for what humans called a comfortable hoodie. I must admit, the Emperor said, sipping his quantum-enhanced coffee that simultaneously existed as every possible flavor, that letting go of 10,000 years of tradition was not easy. But I never knew running an empire could be so fun. The council chamber, once a place of rigid protocol and ceremony, now featured a mix of imperial grandeur and human practicality. The ancient throne of authority had been retrofitted with a massage function after a human engineer noticed the Emperor shifting uncomfortably during long meetings. Captain Rogers, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Empire, sat in what appeared to be a regular office chair but actually existed in 5 dimensions. The transition has been impressive, he said, spinning slowly in his multidimensional seat. Though I have to say, some of your recent innovations have surprised even us. He was referring to the Empire's latest achievements. Once the Imperial scientists had embraced the human approach of, why not, we can't, their progress had become exponential. The same civilization that had spent millennia perfecting existing technology had suddenly started creating new impossibilities on a daily basis. Yes, Admiral-turned-Principal Drake agreed, his scales showing the proud purple of achievement. Just last week, our junior scientists figured out how to make faster-than-light travel even faster by convincing light to speed up. They just asked it politely, just like the humans taught us. Though we did have that minor incident with the space-time continuum, one of the council members added. Who knew that teaching quantum physics to dolphins would lead to them organizing union strikes across multiple dimensions? The Emperor chuckled, something that would have been unthinkable half a year ago. At least we resolved that crisis. Who would have thought the dolphins would settle for unlimited fish and the right to restructure the laws of hydrodynamics? The meeting was interrupted by an excited young imperial scientist bursting into the chamber, something that once would have been punishable by exile but was now a regular occurrence. Your Majesty, the scientist exclaimed, their scales flickering with excitement. We've done it. We've finally done it. Done what? The Emperor asked, genuinely curious. These days, it could be anything from discovering a new fundamental force to figuring out why socks disappeared in the laundry. Turns out they were actually quantum tunneling to a dimension made entirely of lost socks. We've created a device that can transform bureaucratic paperwork into pure energy. The scientist held up what looked like a regular office stapler. Watch this. They fed a standard imperial form into it, and the paper disappeared in a flash of light. Several nearby stars briefly glowed brighter. Impressive, Rogers nodded. Though I should warn you, we tried something similar on Earth. Turned out all that paperwork had to go somewhere. We accidentally created a parallel universe that's nothing but filing cabinets and disappointed bureaucrats. The council chamber erupted in laughter, another sound that would have been alien there just months ago. The Empire had not just embraced human technology, it had embraced the human spirit of innovation, curiosity, and most importantly, the ability to laugh at the absurdity of the universe. You know, the Emperor mused, I've been thinking about our first contact. When our ships confronted yours, we thought we were dealing with primitives because your vessels didn't match our aesthetic standards. We actually thought we could threaten you with our advanced technology. To be fair, Rogers grinned, your ships are very pretty. They're like the sports cars of space, gorgeous but not necessarily practical. Though I have to say, your recent models that combine imperial aesthetics with human engineering are quite impressive. He was referring to the new generation of imperial ships that had started emerging from the shipyards. They still had the characteristic golden hulls and elegant lines, but now they also featured human innovations. The result was vessels that looked like works of art but could casually ignore the laws of physics when they got in the way. The best part, Drake added, is that we've finally figured out why humans laugh so much. It's not just humor, it's the joy of discovery, the thrill of proving impossible things wrong, the sheer delight in finding out that the universe is stranger and more wonderful than we ever imagined. As if to prove his point, a group of human and imperial children ran past the chamber's window, playing with what appeared to be small dragons they had created in their latest science class. The dragons were breathing fire that formed mathematical equations in the air. Speaking of strange and wonderful, Rogers said, checking his watch that measured time in 5 different dimensions, we should probably head to the ceremony. The first graduating class of the Human Imperial Science Academy is about to receive their diplomas, assuming the diplomas haven't achieved sentience again. The Emperor stood, straightening his hoodie. Ah yes, the graduation. I'm particularly looking forward to young Billy Thompson's valedictorian speech. I hear he's planning to deliver it simultaneously across all possible timelines. As they headed to the ceremony, the Emperor reflected on how far they had come. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, believing it had reached the pinnacle of achievement. Then humans had arrived, laughing at the impossible and treating the fundamental laws of the universe as polite suggestions rather than rigid rules. Now, 6 months later, the Empire had changed more than it had in millennia. They had learned that true advancement didn't come from perfecting the known, but from daring to imagine the unknown. They had learned that sometimes the most serious progress came from being able to laugh at yourself. And most importantly, they had learned that the word impossible was often just a challenge waiting to be accepted. As the graduation ceremony began, with diplomas that occasionally tried to escape and student projects that bent reality in new and interesting ways, the Emperor looked at the mixing of humans and Imperials and smiled. The future was impossible to predict, but then again, impossible things were now their specialty.